They were burying him. Flowers on the altar. Candles burning. A horse-drawn carriage parked outside on Brighton Road, waiting to carry the casket one last time through the neighborhood where he grew up. Inside, the pastor was mid-sentence. The pews were full. Mothers were holding each other. Men who did not cry in public were crying. A godmother sat in the front row trying to hold herself together long enough to say goodbye to her godson. That is what was happening inside that church. Outside, two men in ski masks were standing in an alley. Watching. Waiting. When they finally moved, when they crossed that street and walked past the limousine and walked past that carriage and pulled out their weapons, everything that was happening inside that church ended in an instant. 20 rounds. Under 2 minutes. One man was chased around a parked car and shot 13 times. A woman had grabbed onto him in terror. She would not let go. She did not realize she was the reason he could not escape. He took bullet after bullet while she held on. Inside, a man threw himself over the casket and crawled on his hands and knees to the altar to survive. Mourners clawed toward the floor. People screamed. Prayers stopped mid-word. The horse brought to carry the casket was hit. The church became a crime scene. And when the shooting stopped, when the silence came back and the gunmen had vanished and the family had scattered and everyone who loved that young man had run for their lives, his casket was still sitting there. Alone. In the middle of the sanctuary. Nobody was left to carry him out. So the Pittsburgh police did it themselves. This did not happen in a film. This was not a scene from a show. This was a church. A real church. A real funeral. A real family. And it happened in broad daylight with cameras rolling on every side. If that just stopped you cold, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Cases Decoded. Drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is over there. I want to know exactly who is in the room with me on this one. Drop it below. Then stay with me, because the full story is something else entirely. Welcome to Cases Decoded. Real cases. Real people. Real truth, laid out from the very beginning to the very end, nothing left out and nothing softened. Now let us go all the way back to where this started. His name was John James Hornizes Jr. 20 years old. North Side Pittsburgh. The kind of neighborhood that does not make the news for good things, but the kind of neighborhood where people love each other deeply and fiercely and where community means something real. Everybody knew everybody. You could not walk a block without running into someone who knew your mother or went to school with your cousin or remembered you from when you were small. John loved basketball the way some people love breathing. It was not just a hobby. It was the place where he made sense. He played at the Pittsburgh Project and at Urban Impact, two organizations that gave young men somewhere to pour their energy when the streets started making noise. He carried that love through Allegheny Elementary, through Allegheny Middle School, all the way to Alderness High School. On the court he was not a young man caught between two worlds. He was just John. In his element. Fully himself. The people who knew him did not describe him the way eulogies usually go, all perfection and light. They described him the way you describe someone real. He was a son. He was a friend. He was the kind of person who walked into a room and made it feel different. Louder. More alive. People wanted to be near him. That kind of energy does not get manufactured. You either have it or you do not. John had it. But he was not perfect. And the people who loved him would tell you that too. He was not the worst person in the room. He was not the best. He was somewhere in the honest middle, the place where most 20-year-old men actually live. Trying to figure out who he was. Trying to find the line between the person he wanted to become and the pull of everything around him. Still building. Still choosing. Not finished yet. The streets had weight in that neighborhood. They always do. It is not something outsiders easily understand, the way a block, a crew, a set of unspoken rules can shape you before you even realize it is happening. John got caught up. The kind of life where your reputation matters more than most things. Where loyalty is everything and perceived disrespect is a debt that compounds. He posted videos with his crew. Throwing signs. Showing out. Living in the way you live at 20 when the future still feels far away and the present is loud and the consequences still feel like someone else's problem. The day before he was killed, John posted one of those videos. He was laughing in it. His crew was around him. He looked like a young man without a single weight on his shoulders. He had no idea that he had less than 24 hours left. And somewhere else, someone was watching that video. Not to celebrate him. There was tension on the block. The kind that does not come from one moment, it builds. It accumulates the way pressure builds behind a closed door. Corner by corner. Day by day. Week by week. Until the whole neighborhood is living inside it without anyone saying out loud what everyone already knows.
That builds slowly.
It was about territory.
All at once.
About corners and who ran them and what moved through them.
Certain corners.
About respect, who had it, who lost it, who was owed it.
Does not stay quiet for
about
long.
A dispute that had been simmering without resolution for long enough that both sides had already decided how it was going to end. That kind of pressure finds the first available crack. It found a party. John and a young man named Sharon Troutman ended up in the same room. Words got exchanged. The kind of words that make a room go quiet, where everyone near them takes a half step back because they can feel what is happening. And before it was done, Troutman looked John directly in the face and made sure the message landed. It is not over. Watch over your back. John heard it. Everybody in that room heard it. And the next day, John still went out. That decision was the last one he ever made. Cedar Avenue. East Allegheny neighborhood, North Side, Pittsburgh. The 300 block. A Sunoco gas station on the corner. A Pittsburgh Regional Transit bus shelter steps away. City sidewalks. Ordinary people inside an ordinary night that had no reason to turn into anything else. October 15, 2022. Jalone Hines, 21 years old, and Sharon Troutman were not passing through. They had come to that corner with a purpose. They positioned themselves near the gas station, fixed their eyes on a black SUV connected to John and his circle, and they waited. There was no intention to confront. No plan to negotiate. The decision had already been made before they arrived. When the SUV started to pull out, they opened fire. No warning. No pause. Just rounds on a public street. The people in that SUV fired back. And right there, feet away at a bus stop, in the middle of a gunfight they had no idea was about to happen, were two women. Betty Jean Averitt. 59 years old. Not connected to anyone involved. Not part of any dispute. She was standing at a bus stop waiting to go home. That is the entire story of why she was there. She was going home. Jacqueline Mahalik. 33 years old. Same thing. A woman at the end of her day. Standing in a spot she had probably stood in 100 times before. There is no version of that night where she should have been in danger. There was no reason for her name to ever be in this story. Both women were shot and killed. John was hit. He was found dead at the scene. 3 people dead in under a minute. 2 of them had absolutely nothing, not one single thing, to do with any of it. They were just there. Within hours, investigators had 17 different camera angles feeding into the investigation. City cameras running the entire length of Cedar Avenue. Cameras from the Sunoco station itself. Footage from Allegheny Commons. From nearby businesses. Every lens that had been pointed at that block was being stripped of its footage and reviewed frame by frame. And the cameras had seen everything. Jalone Hines thought he had disappeared into the night. The cameras knew different. They caught him before the shooting, walking toward the gas station, stopping near a playground, going still. Positioning. Waiting. The footage showed the approach, the moment, the aftermath. After the shots, the cameras caught him limping away, a bullet in the back of his leg. Then less than 5 minutes later, the same cameras that watched him open fire watched him walk through the front doors of Allegheny General Hospital. Same jacket. Same shoes. Not one item of clothing changed. He went from a triple homicide to a hospital emergency room in under 5 minutes, and he did not even change his shirt. When that footage played in court, the room went quiet. It did not need a single word of explanation. Detectives David O'Neill and Edward Feller worked the case hard. Jalone Hines, Sharon Troutman, and Samuel Pegay were arrested and charged with the triple homicide on Cedar Avenue. 3 people dead. 2 of them with no connection to any of it whatsoever. And here is the thing about where this story goes next. While the families of Betty Jean Averitt and Jacqueline Mahalik were still trying to understand what had happened to their loved ones, still in those first brutal days of grief where nothing feels real, John's family was making funeral arrangements. Trying to give a young man the goodbye he deserved. Trying to do the last act of love that families do. And 2 other people had already started planning something of their own. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now and type, "I am still here." I want to see exactly who is following this story all the way through. Because what is coming next is the part that broke an entire city, and you need to be locked in for every second of it. Hit that like button if you have not already. Subscribe to Cases Decoded. Now let us keep going. John James Hornizes Jr. deserved a real goodbye. His family made sure he got one. A full ceremony at Destiny of Faith Church at 3737 Brighton Road, at the intersection of Benton Avenue, in the Brighton Heights neighborhood. A horse-drawn carriage waiting outside. Flowers. Candles. A packed sanctuary. Pastor Brenda Gregg had prepared her church to receive a grieving family and a grieving community. John's godmother Paige Davis was in a pew in the front, holding herself together, ready to say goodbye to her godson the right way. For a family that grief had already shattered, this was the one gift they could still give him. A proper exit. A moment of peace and dignity before the long, hard road of learning how to live without him. But before the service, John's family had done something that matters. They had reached out to police. They had asked for protection at the funeral. Not because they wanted to make a scene, because they were afraid. Because they knew who was still out there. Because they understood that a funeral, every person connected to John gathered in one place at one time, was exactly the kind of target that came next in a situation like this. They knew it. They felt it. And they said so. What came of that request has since been documented. 2 officers were assigned to provide protection, but they went to a nearby funeral home instead of the church, found no activity, and left. They never showed up to Destiny of Faith. The family had asked for protection. It was promised. And on the day it was needed most, nobody came. What is certain is this. While the family was inside that church saying goodbye, 2 figures dressed in all black were already outside. Moving through the neighborhood. Ski masks pulled down. Gloves on. They came through the alley behind Pittsburgh's chicken and fish restaurant, a few short steps from the church doors. They studied the building. Watched the entrance. Looked at who was coming and going. Read the layout. Then they went back into the alley. They did not leave. They waited. 20 minutes. Think about what was happening inside during those 20 minutes. The pastor speaking. Prayers being said. A godmother in the front row. A family crying over a casket. People doing the hardest, most human thing there is, letting someone go. On the other side of those walls, 2 masked men in an alley were counting down the clock. Nobody inside had any idea. 12 minutes past noon. They came back out of the alley. Same two figures. Same black clothing. Same masks. But the waiting was done. One of them was carrying a gun fitted with an extended magazine, the kind of weapon that does not get brought to a location unless you plan to use every single round loaded into it. They crossed the street. Calm. Deliberate. No rush. They walked right past the limousine parked at the curb. They walked right past the horse-drawn carriage, the one that had been brought specifically to carry John James Hornizes Jr. on his final ride through the neighborhood. They passed all of it like it was nothing. Like a church full of grieving people was just a building on a street. Inside, the pastor was still in the middle of his words. Families were still in their seats. People who had driven from across the city to be there were still praying, still crying, still present in the way you are present when you are saying goodbye to someone you love and you know you will never see them again. Not one person inside had any idea. The last thing standing between them and what was about to happen was a set of church walls. Then it started. Hezekiah Nixon moved to the side of the building and opened fire. Not at one specific person. At anyone. At the building. At the crowd gathered around it. He was not picking targets, he was pulling the trigger. At the exact same moment, Sean Davis appeared at the front. He found a man on the sidewalk and went straight for him, no hesitation, no pause, and started chasing him around a parked car, firing the entire time. The man ran. Davis followed. Around the car. Still shooting. The man could not break free. A woman standing nearby had grabbed onto him in pure terror, frozen, shaking, holding on because her body did not know what else to do. She had no idea that her grip was the reason he could not run. She was anchoring him in place. Making him a standing target. He was shot 13 times. 13. And he lived. The horse brought to carry the casket was hit by a bullet. Inside the church, the sound of the gunfire hit like a shockwave. 1 second people were in prayer. The next second the world was pure chaos. People screamed and dropped. Bodies went to the floor. A man launched himself over John's casket, cleared it completely, and crawled on his hands and knees toward the altar, trying to get to anything that felt like cover. Others collapsed behind pews. Children. Grandmothers. People in their Sunday clothes pressed flat against a church floor. The sanctuary that Pastor Brenda Gregg had opened as a place of peace became a place of terror inside of 90 seconds. The city's ShotSpotter system captured it in real time. First, approximately 5 rounds.
This was not a nightmare.
Then, almost immediately, approximately 15 more.
During a funeral.
20 rounds
and
total.
Every single second of it was
start to finish, under 2 minutes.
They did not just come to kill.
Then silence.
They came to finish what they started.
Davis and Nixon disappeared back into the alley. Gone. 6 people were down. 5 shot. 1 hurt in the scramble to escape. 1 victim in critical condition. 5 were taken to Allegheny General Hospital. A 6th was transported to UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. The service was over. Not ended. Over. The family was gone. The mourners had scattered in every direction. The pews were empty. The candles were still burning. And John's casket was still sitting there. Right in the center of the sanctuary. Surrounded by flowers. Exactly where it had been when the pastor was speaking. Waiting. Nobody came. Police hit the area from multiple zones within minutes. The scene was wide. Shell casings were scattered across the ground outside the church. Witnesses were still shaking, some still hiding. And Davis and Nixon had already melted into the surrounding neighborhood. Commander Richard Ford stepped in front of cameras. His message was direct. More than one shooter. Directly connected to the triple homicide on Cedar Avenue 13 days earlier. Not a random act. Not an isolated incident. A continuation. The same war, a new location. But the investigation had something powerful on its side. Cameras. Everywhere. Church cameras. Business cameras. City surveillance on every surrounding block. Investigators were pulling footage from every angle they could find and reviewing it in real time, building the timeline piece by piece, image by image, frame by frame. A Hyundai Elantra surfaced in the footage, captured near the church in the minutes after the shooting, moving up a nearby street. Investigators kept pulling. And then they found it. Earlier recordings from the McKees Rocks Bridge showed two masked figures inside that same vehicle. Same clothing as the shooters. Same masks. Same build. The car had been on that bridge before the attack. They ran the plates. One name came back. Sean Davis. 19 years old. McKees Rocks, Allegheny County. Police located the Elantra parked half a block from Davis's home. And here is the detail that made investigators stop and look twice. Sean Davis was supposed to be on house arrest. There was an ankle monitor on his leg, a court-ordered device designed specifically to track his location and alert authorities if he tried to remove it. That monitor was meant to be the thing that kept the community safe from him while his case was pending. Instead, Davis had gone online. He had recorded himself. He had posted a video for anyone in the world to watch, showing step by step how he could take that monitor off his ankle and put it back on without triggering a single alert. He was not careful about it. He was not secretive. He was bragging. Showing off. Laughing at the system on camera. That same man had just walked to a church funeral and opened fire. At 5:40 that same afternoon, police spotted Davis and Nixon together, getting into the Elantra. Officers closed in fast. The stop happened on the McKees Rocks Bridge, the same bridge where that surveillance footage had been recorded. Nixon bolted. He hit the door running, pulled his firearm mid-sprint, and threw it off the side of the bridge into the Ohio River below before officers tackled him. Davis dropped his weapon on the road. Over the radio, the call that ended the manhunt. "You got two in custody." Divers from Pittsburgh Police River Rescue went into the Ohio River. They recovered Nixon's gun. When investigators ran the serial number, it came back connected to other crimes, this case now extending its reach even further than Cedar Avenue and Brighton Heights combined. In court, their defense argued the shooters were masked and unidentifiable. The judge reviewed the evidence, the clothing matches, the vehicle, the license plate, the timeline, the weapons, and ended that argument completely. Bail denied. Trial ordered. The cameras had seen everything. And everything the cameras saw was now going to be used against them. Pittsburgh went quiet in a way that cities do not usually go quiet. Not the quiet of nothing happening. The quiet of a city sitting with something it could not explain. Something it had no framework for. Because there are certain things, certain places and certain moments, that even people who have grown up around violence treat as sacred. As off-limits. As the places where the war does not follow you. A church. A funeral. The moment you put someone you love in the ground. Those places were supposed to be safe. That was the unspoken agreement. And someone had just torn it up. Mayor Ed Gainey stood in front of cameras and said what the whole city was feeling. He said he could not believe someone had shot up holy ground. Those words exactly. Holy ground. And it was not a politician's phrase. It was the only phrase that fit. Because that is what it was. A sanctuary. A house of grief and prayer. And someone had walked in with guns. Parents started asking a question they had never had to ask before. Not how do I keep my child away from danger, they already knew the answer to that. But how do I keep my child safe at a funeral? There is no answer to that question. There is no version of parenting that covers it. And that absence of an answer is what shook people the deepest. It was not just what happened. It was what it meant. It meant nowhere was protected anymore. Then came the image. John's casket was still inside the church. His family had run. His friends had run. The pallbearers he deserved, the people who had come there to carry him, were gone. Every single one of them had fled for their lives. So Pittsburgh police officers walked into that sanctuary and carried John James Hornizes Jr. to the hearse themselves. Officers in uniform. In a church that was now a crime scene. Carrying a young man's casket to a waiting hearse because there was no one else left to do it. Deputy District Attorney Emma Shodell put it plainly in court. She did not reach for anything dramatic. She simply said, Mr. Hornizes' casket became a crime scene. His pallbearers were the Pittsburgh police. That sentence has weight. It carries everything this story is about. Every failure. Every consequence. Every person who should have been safe and was not. One man in the neighborhood, talking about the weapon Hezekiah Nixon had carried to that church, said it reminded him of Vietnam. He was a grown man. He was not being dramatic. He was standing in his own city, on a residential street, after a church funeral, and the weapon he had just heard described reminded him of a war zone. He asked the question out loud because there was nowhere else to put it. How does a 16-year-old in Pittsburgh get a weapon like that? Nobody answered him. Nobody could. And underneath all of it, quieter than the news cameras, quieter than the public statements, were the families of Betty Jean Averitt and Jacqueline Mahalik. Two women shot dead at a bus stop on Cedar Avenue 13 days before the funeral. Still in the early days of grief. Still in the part where you wake up for a moment and forget, and then you remember, and it hits you all over again. And now they were watching the next wave. More violence. More cameras. More names. All of it growing from the same night that had taken their people. No resolution. No peace. Just grief building on top of grief with no ceiling in sight. Hezekiah Nixon was 16 years old when he stood at the side of Destiny of Faith Church and pulled the trigger. 16. He was 19 by the time his case was resolved. The court tried him as an adult. The reasoning was not complicated. What he did was not the act of a child who made a terrible split-second decision. It was planned. It was executed. It involved traveling to a location, surveilling it for 20 minutes, and then opening fire on a crowd of people gathered to bury their dead. The court looked at all of that and made a decision. Nixon pleaded guilty. Multiple counts of aggravated assault. Criminal conspiracy. 11 to 22 years in state prison. The charges covered everything. Attempted homicide. Aggravated assault. Criminal conspiracy. Firearms violations. Aggravated cruelty to animals for the horse struck during the shooting. And tampering with evidence, for pulling his gun mid-sprint and throwing it off the McKees Rocks Bridge into the river, hoping it would disappear before anyone could tie it to him. The district attorney's office said exactly what needed to be said. This was not a teenager who panicked. This was a teenager who planned. Who waited. Who showed up at a church, on a day when a family was burying someone, with a weapon that had no purpose other than maximum harm. Every single step of what he did that day was a decision. As for Sean Davis, the man on house arrest who filmed himself defeating his own ankle monitor, who chased a man and shot him 13 times outside a church in front of witnesses and cameras, he was still awaiting trial at the time of the most recent reporting. The evidence is what it is. His day is coming. The family sat through every proceeding. Every hearing. Every single motion filed and argued in a courtroom. They did it carrying grief that no outcome could fix. Because accountability is real and accountability matters, but accountability is not the same as healing. Accountability does not bring anyone back. It does not give a family their morning routine back. It does not fill the chair at the table. It does not undo one single second of what those families were forced to live through. 11 to 22 years. That is what 2 minutes of violence cost one teenager. The other one is still waiting to find out what it costs him. To understand what happened at Destiny of Faith Church, you cannot start at Destiny of Faith Church. You have to go back to Spring Hill. To a confrontation between two people that most people watching it probably assumed would just fade. Most do. Two people. A situation. Some words. Then it cools off and life moves on. This one did not cool off. This one grew. That confrontation became tension. That tension moved through the neighborhood and found a party. At that party, a threat was made. That threat became an ambush on Cedar Avenue. That ambush killed 3 people, including 2 women at a bus stop who had never once been part of any of this. That triple homicide became a funeral. That funeral became the next attack. Look at that chain. Really look at it. Every single link was a choice. Every single step was someone deciding that the answer to the last act of violence was another act of violence. And every single time that choice was made, the circle of damage grew wider. The people it hit got further and further from the original dispute. By the time it reached a church on Brighton Road, it had already consumed lives that had nothing to do with how any of it started.
Passers-by.
A bus stop.
They were scoping the location.
A sanctuary.
Studying the layout.
A godmother in a front pew.
Calculating their approach.
That is what a cycle of retaliation looks like from the outside. But that is the full shape of it. From the inside, it never starts with a gun. It starts with a corner. With a look. With a word at a party that nobody swallowed their pride enough to let go. Disrespect, whether it was real or whether it was just how someone read a situation, becomes the thing that sets everything in motion. And once it is moving, it does not care who is in the way. It does not ask whether the woman at the bus stop had anything to do with it. It does not stop at the church door. Hezekiah Nixon was 16 years old and he showed up to a funeral with a weapon that made a grown man in that neighborhood think of Vietnam. That weapon did not appear from nowhere. Somebody sold it. Somebody passed it along. Somebody knew a 16-year-old had it and did nothing. How does that happen? That is not a rhetorical question asked for effect. That is a real question that Pittsburgh and every city like it is still trying to answer. Sean Davis was on house arrest. He had a court-ordered monitor on his leg. The system put it there specifically to prevent him from being in the community causing harm. And he made a video about it. Laughed about it. Posted it online. And then less than 2 weeks later he was at a funeral with a weapon. That gap, from house arrest to shooter at a church, is not a gap that closes itself. Something filled it. Something made it possible. John's family asked for protection before the funeral. They knew the risk. They said so directly. They put it in front of the people who could have done something about it. What happened with that request, whether it was taken seriously, whether it was acted on with the urgency it deserved, is a question that still does not have a complete answer. Somewhere inside this chain, there was a moment where it could have gone differently. Maybe more than one moment. A conversation that redirected something. An intervention that broke a link. A request that was taken seriously enough to change what happened next. We do not know exactly where that moment was. But it existed. It always does. And in this case, it was missed. I want you to hold one image in your mind before we finish. Pittsburgh police officers carrying John James Hornizes Jr.'s casket out of Destiny of Faith Church. Not his mother. Not his godmother. Not the friends who had grown up with him or the teammates who had run courts with him or the people who had come from across the city to say goodbye. Police officers. Men and women in uniform who showed up that morning to secure a crime scene and ended up doing the one thing that nobody prepares for when they put on a badge. They carried him out because everyone else was gone. Everyone who loved him had run for their lives. Deputy District Attorney Emma Shodell said it in court without drama, without performance. Just the plain truth of it. Mr. Hornizes's casket became a crime scene. His pallbearers were the Pittsburgh police. Let that sentence sit. 3 people died on Cedar Avenue on October 15, 2022. Betty Jean Averitt, 59 years old. She was at a bus stop. She was going home. Jacqueline Mahalik, 33 years old. She was at a bus stop. She was going home. They never made it. Their names should not be footnotes in this story. They should be the reason this story matters. 2 women who had never done a single thing to be part of any of this, killed because they were standing in the wrong place at the precise wrong moment during someone else's war. 6 more people were shot at a funeral 13 days later. A horse was struck by a bullet meant for a human being. A church became a crime scene. A 16-year-old is sitting in state prison for 11 to 22 years. A 19-year-old is still waiting for his trial. All of it. Every single piece of it. Traced back to one argument. One moment of disrespect, real or perceived, that nobody found a way to walk away from. All of it avoidable. All of it real. This is not a Pittsburgh story. Or it is, but it is also every city's story. It is the story of what happens when the exit from a conflict disappears. When the only response anyone knows is the next response. When sacred spaces stop being sacred. When the people who have nothing to do with anything end up paying the highest price. When a family buries one person and then almost gets buried themselves. When police officers carry the casket because there is nobody left to do it. So here is what I want to leave you with. If you were inside Destiny of Faith Church on October 28, 2022, what would you have done? Not the easy answer. The honest one. What do you think it would actually take? Not a slogan, not a policy, just the real answer, to break a chain like this one before it reaches a church. Drop it in the comments. Every single one. I read them all and I mean that. And tell me where you are watching from and what time it is over there right now. Drop it below. I want to know who stayed with me through this whole story. If this case did something to you, if you made it all the way here, do 3 things before you leave. Hit that like button. Subscribe to Cases Decoded. Turn on your notifications so you are the first one notified when the next case drops. Because what is coming next on this channel is something you are not ready for. We do not soften a single thing here. We tell it straight. We tell it real. Every case. Every time. See you in the next one.